My wife doesn't need her own money. Everything she earns belongs to me. My husband sneered across the dinner table, his voice loud enough for his mother to nod in smug agreement. For a moment I froze, my fork hovering above the plate. The humiliation burned deep, but beneath it, something colder stirred. That night, while they laughed about how I should be grateful to be provided for, I opened my laptop and began writing everything down. Every insult, every receipt, every secret withdrawal. They thought I was powerless. What they didn't know was that I was already building the trap. At first, our marriage looked like the glossy cover of a lifestyle magazine. My husband, Ethan, was charming in public, the kind of man who opened doors and smiled at waiters as if generosity came naturally to him. His family adored luxury. Dinners at five-star restaurants were their weekly ritual, and for a while I believed I was being welcomed into a world of privilege. I told myself I was lucky. Who wouldn't want to be treated like a queen? But queens who don't control their own crowns are nothing more than ornaments. It began subtly, the way weeds creep through cracks in the pavement. Ethan would casually ask to see my bank statements, framing it as looking out for us. He'd say things like, "It's better if I manage the bills, Sloane. You shouldn't worry about numbers." At first, I mistook it for care. Slowly, though, I realized his questions weren't about sharing responsibility. They were about stripping it from me. Every time I tried to push back, he branded me as irrational. "You're too sensitive," he'd say with a dismissive smile as though my instincts were nothing more than a child's tantrum. His mother, seated like a matriarch at the table, would nod approvingly, sealing my fate with her silence. Each dinner with his family felt less like a meal and more like an audition, where my worth was measured by how well I played the obedient wife. Friends began to fade from my calendar. Invitations I once accepted without hesitation became awkward negotiations. Ethan insisted it was better if I stayed home, told me I should focus on family rather than waste time with outsiders. I didn't notice the cage being built around me until the door quietly shut. One night, after another argument that dissolved into his sharp accusations and my muted defense, I sat alone in the guest room with my laptop. I opened a blank email addressed to myself. I typed out every word, every phrase he'd said. "You should be grateful. You always imagine problems. Everything you earn belongs to this family." I pressed send. It wasn't much, but it was something, a time-stamped truth, a fragment of reality I could hold on to. If I hadn't done that, I might have believed his version of events. I might have believed that I was, indeed, the crazy one. The first fracture came not from words, but from numbers. I noticed a charge for an expensive bottle of wine, one I never ordered. Then, another line item, a reservation deposit at a hotel I had never set foot in. My stomach tightened. Maybe it was a mistake, I thought. Maybe. But deep down, I knew. I bought a leather-bound notebook and called it my truth ledger. Every receipt I photographed, every odd transaction I jotted down with dates and times. I stapled printed bank statements to its pages and slipped in screenshots of text messages where Ethan casually mentioned handling my paycheck. It became my lifeline, my way of fighting back against the fog he tried to wrap me in. One night, his voice broke through that fog with chilling clarity. "Your money is this family's money," he said, his tone flat, almost bored. "There's no difference." I recorded it on my phone, the audio clipped but unmistakable. Hearing it played back later, alone in my car, was like snapping awake from a long, restless sleep. I developed a ritual. Before bed, I'd read through my notes, my emails to myself, the ledger. It was a form of self-hypnosis, undoing the poison of his gaslighting. Where he said, "You're misremembering," my records said, "Here is proof." Where he said, "You're overreacting," my timestamps whispered, "This really happened." Still, there were moments when I faltered, nights when doubt pressed hard enough to make me question the sanity of documenting my own marriage. During one of those nights, I called my best friend, Mara. The conversation was brief. She was busy, I was hesitant. But when she said, "You're not crazy, Sloane. Don't let him convince you otherwise," something inside me steadied. It was a small reminder, but it was enough to keep the ground beneath my feet. As weeks passed, the evidence piled higher, heavier. I realized then that what I needed wasn't an outburst or a confrontation. Not a single strike fueled by rage. Rage is hot and burns out fast. What I needed was a chessboard and patience. I needed a game that played on his ego, on his obsession with control, on the arrogance that blinded him. One move at a time, one piece at a time, because this was never about proving my sanity to him. It was about proving to myself that I hadn't lost it, that I wasn't the fragile, irrational woman he tried to sculpt me into. And as I closed my ledger one night, staring at the neat stack of evidence glowing faintly under the lamp, I whispered to myself, I don't need a strike, I need a checkmate. If I hadn't written it all down, I might have believed him. But now, the truth was mine, and I knew exactly how I would use it. The ledger was no longer enough. Words on paper were comforting, but words could be twisted. I needed something undeniable, something digital, something that would withstand his lies when the day finally came. So I built an archive. Every receipt became a photograph, saved to a hidden cloud folder. Every bank statement was exported to CSV and uploaded with redundant backups under names that meant nothing to anyone but me. Each audio recording was labeled with precise dates and times so that no lawyer, no judge could ever accuse me of fabrication. My marriage had turned into a project of documentation, and I managed it with the precision of a strategist. Still, secrecy was essential. Ethan loved to rifle through my desk drawers, pretending to look for stamps or chargers. I knew if he found even a scrap of this evidence, he'd destroy it and convince me I'd invented the whole thing. So I learned the art of the neutral mask. My face became calm, unreadable. I practiced saying in a way that sounded submissive but gave nothing away. I trained my pulse to remain steady when he made one of his cutting remarks, when his mother smirked over her wine glass, when his hand landed possessively on my shoulder as if branding me. At the bank, I asked questions I never thought I'd ask. How could I set alerts on every transaction? How could I block certain categories of spending without his knowledge? The banker raised an eyebrow, but she explained merchant category codes, limits, and alerts. Together, we set up a system where every large purchase sent an instant message to me. I quietly arranged for a secondary card in his name with a microscopic limit, masked as a courtesy extension. To him, it looked like a gift. To me, it was a leash. Then came the legal reinforcement. I booked an appointment with a lawyer under the guise of updating my will. Instead, I asked about hidden accounts, marital property, digital evidence admissibility. She taught me terms like breach of fiduciary duty and post-nuptial clauses triggered by financial misconduct. Each word was like a weapon slid quietly into my arsenal. It was exhausting, this double life of smiling compliance by day and meticulous scheming by night. There were times when my chest ached with the strain of holding my composure. So I gave myself small reprieves, an old black and white film on a quiet Tuesday night, a bowl of buttered popcorn, the faint comfort of reminding myself I was still human, still allowed to feel. These tiny pauses kept me from hardening into someone I didn't want to become. And yet, even in those moments, I could not escape the thought. Once the pieces aligned, all I would need was a stage. The stage began to take shape when I remembered Olivia, a college friend who had climbed the ranks to become a revenue manager at one of the city's luxury hotels. I met her for coffee, keeping my tone casual. Over cappuccinos, I asked her about ID verification policies. She explained how reservations could be set to require a photo ID that matched the cardholder name, no exceptions. Could that be added to a file? Preemptively? I asked. She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. The next day, my husband's favorite hotel quietly placed a flag on any reservation tied to my account. Meanwhile, I reached out to someone else, my old mentor in public relations. She taught me how to defend reputations, how to counter smear campaigns. Now, she taught me how to fortify my own. He'll try to discredit you, she warned. Control your narrative before he writes it for you. Together, we built a subtle media shield. allies in the right places, sympathetic ears who would be ready if my story ever needed to surface. My lawyer, impressed with the growing body of evidence, suggested a post-nup addendum that activated upon proof of financial fraud. It was technical, clinical, but in plain terms it meant this: if Ethan ever misused my funds, he forfeited any claim to my property. He signed it absent-mindedly, too arrogant to imagine it could apply to him. I began moving money in small increments to a new account under my maiden name, building a 6-month emergency fund. Each transfer was tiny enough to pass unnoticed, but together they formed a safety net that grew thicker with every week. Knowing that my survival didn't depend on him gave me a steadiness I hadn't felt in years. The pieces were in motion: the documentation, the banking safeguards, the legal clauses, the hotel's silent flag. My arsenal was invisible, but it was real. And still, I reminded myself to breathe, to feel. On some nights, I sat with my journal and wrote letters to the girl I had once been, the one who fell in love too quickly, who mistook control for care. I didn't want to erase her. I wanted to promise her that I was bringing us both to safety. I had everything I needed except the spark, a trigger, a stage big enough to hold his arrogance and let it collapse under its own weight. The day I realized what that stage would be, I drafted one email. The subject line was simple, forgettable: pre-authorization policy. It looked harmless, but inside it was the first domino in a chain he would never see until it was too late. When I pressed send, I felt something shift. The game was no longer just about survival. It was about winning. Patience became my sharpest weapon. Each morning, I played the role of the dutiful wife, smiling over coffee, listening to Ethan complain about colleagues or boast about his investments. I mirrored his moods, gave him the illusion of control, but every night, when the house fell quiet, I returned to my desk and pored over the numbers. I matched receipts against statements, compared transaction times, recorded patterns. My life became a performance layered over a private investigation, a double existence where I laughed at his jokes by day and sharpened my case against him by night. The hardest part wasn't the deception, it was the restraint. Sometimes a text would light up my phone, a smug message from Ethan bragging about a new reservation or hinting at another extravagant purchase. My blood would heat, my fingers trembling with the urge to fire back something venomous. Instead, I closed my eyes, inhaled, and counted to 8 before exhaling. I reminded myself that one reckless reply could unravel months of work. He thrived on getting reactions. Withholding mine was my quiet rebellion. Still, I knew preparation wasn't just about patience. It was about contingencies. I built scenarios like a strategist mapping a battlefield. If he tried to charge rare wines, the merchant category code would trigger alerts. If he upgraded to a luxury suite, the ID verification at the hotel would demand his name match the card holder. Each possibility became an A-B path in my mind, rehearsed until I could anticipate his choices like predictable chess moves. But even strategy needs rhythm. I crafted deliberate lows to make the highs hit harder, like a symphony that swells only after silence. When his arrogance cut too sharply, I allowed myself a fall, a few quiet tears, a long walk, the acceptance that pain was part of the arc. That way, when the crescendo came, it would feel not just victorious, but earned. One afternoon, while the city buzzed with the rush of commuters, I slipped into a small bakery near campus, one I hadn't visited since college. The smell of sugar and butter hit me like a memory. I ordered a simple pastry, sat in the corner, and let 20 minutes drift by without thinking about banks, evidence, or lawyers. Just the taste of flaky crust, the hum of students laughing at the next table. For those brief moments, I wasn't plotting or surviving. I was simply Sloane again. It reminded me why all of this mattered, not revenge, but freedom to be myself without fear. Of course, the reprieve didn't last. My phone buzzed with a notification at precisely 15:04. Reservation confirmed, Grand Savoy Hotel. I stared at the screen, my pastry half-eaten. The stage was being set. Ethan's hunger for attention was predictable, but I studied it anyway, dissecting it like a case file. He wasn't addicted to money, he was addicted to admiration. His victories only mattered if witnessed. His greatest fear wasn't loss, but humiliation. That was his weak point, and it would become my strongest lever. His mother was easier still, a woman who measured morality by wealth, who equated cash with credibility. Yet I had seen her flinch when a neighbor's scandal made the papers. Image, not love, ruled her. Her fear of public shame would eclipse any loyalty to her son. Then there was Daniel, Ethan's younger brother. Jealous, restless, forever overshadowed. He admired my career too openly, then mocked it behind my back. He craved a stage of his own, and I knew he saw Ethan's planned party as his launch pad. If that stage collapsed beneath them, Daniel would be the first to abandon ship, exposing secrets in desperation to save himself. I mapped it all out on paper one night, sketching circles labeled greed, pride, envy. Arrows crisscrossed the page. Greed fed pride. Pride demanded admiration. Envy cracked loyalty. It all came down to the same axis, desire. Their own vices would do half my work for me. But I also feared what those vices could make of me. Would I harden into someone unrecognizable? To guard against that, I wrote myself letters I never sent. One read, "Don't become stone. You are not him." It was my way of holding on to softness, of reminding myself that vengeance was not the destination. It was the bridge. As the nights grew shorter and the ledger thicker, I realized the truth. I didn't need to strike them. I only needed to place the mirror. If they looked long enough, their own reflections would destroy them. And with that, I closed my journal, whispering into the quiet, to bring down a mirror, let it reflect itself. It happened on a Saturday morning. I was pouring coffee when I noticed my wallet slightly ajar on the counter. Ethan strolled in, casual as ever, but I caught the glint in his eyes. Later, when I checked, the platinum card was gone. My phone buzzed almost instantly. "I've got your card, Sloane," he said, his voice brimming with triumph. "Tonight, everyone will see what real money looks like. My family will finally respect me the way they should." I pressed the mug to my lips, hiding my smile. "That won't work," I answered, my tone even, stripped of emotion. The silence on the other end told me he had heard the words, but not their weight. He believed it was arrogance, not calculation. By evening, I knew he was at the Grand Savoy. I imagined the glass elevator carrying him upward, his pulse racing with excitement while mine slowed into steady calm. Every floor he ascended was another step into the trap. When my phone chimed with the bank's automated message, "Attempted charge, review needed," my fingers traced the rim of my cup. The play had begun. If you were me, what would you do? Would you call the hotel to confirm, or would you let the lights and applause consume them first? I chose silence. The spectacle mattered more than the prevention. What Ethan didn't realize was the fine print. When he'd shoved the responsibility of booking onto me weeks ago, I'd helped him with the paperwork. My handwriting filled the box labeled responsible party. A personal guarantee clause signed under his name, binding him to every dollar spent. He thought it was just a formality. Downstairs, the ballroom glittered. His family arrived in sequined gowns and pressed tuxedos, their chatter rising with the clink of glasses. Ethan basked in it, waving my platinum card like a trophy. The first round of champagne arrived, only for the waiter to return moments later with an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry, sir. Your card didn't go through." Ethan frowned, waved dismissively, and handed the card back. Another attempt. Another denial. What he didn't see was the invisible wall. The card he'd taken wasn't mine at all, but a supplemental account capped at $1, programmed to reject any luxury merchant code. Every order beyond that dollar triggered a verification. His jaw tightened. He demanded a manager, his voice rising enough for the nearest tables to turn. A printed copy of the reservation contract appeared, the words crisp under the ballroom lights. All charges are the responsibility of the undersigned party. His name, his signature. As if that wasn't enough, the front desk called for ID. "Hotel policy," they explained politely. "The name on the credit card must match the photo identification." Ethan produced his driver's license, but it didn't matter. The card bore my name, and without me present, it was void. The staff had been instructed in advance, transfer any unmatched charges directly to the contract's guarantor. Him. While chaos simmered, I sat quietly in the hotel's side lounge. The cushions were soft beneath my hands, the chandelier above a blur of light. I inhaled deeply, let my shoulders drop. Relief mixed with sorrow. There was satisfaction in seeing him stumble, yes, but there was also grief for the woman I had been. The one who once believed his charm was protection, not a weapon. I hadn't wanted this marriage to end in a public collapse, yet here I was, watching the curtain fall. The muffled announcement echoed from the lobby. "Mr. Ethan Carter, please report to the payment desk." A pause. "Mr. Ethan Carter, third and final call." I closed my eyes for a moment, steadying myself against the tide of emotion. Triumph had its own heaviness. Still, the stage was his now, not mine. He would walk into the spotlight carrying only his greed and his pride, and I knew both would crush him. The rejection at the table rippled through the ballroom like a sudden crack of thunder. Waiters exchanged nervous glances while guests craned their necks to watch. Ethan barked at the manager, demanding another attempt, but each swipe ended with the same dull refusal. Finally, security was summoned. 2 men in tailored suits who asked him politely but firmly to step out to the payment desk. Cameras emerged. His cousins, his uncles, even his own mother held up their phones as though documenting his humiliation was entertainment. Ethan's composure snapped. "She did this!" he shouted, his face mottled red. "She set me up! Sloane's been scheming to ruin me!" His words echoed against the chandeliers, desperate and shrill. His mother was quick to pile on, her voice sharp as a blade. "You think we don't see what you're doing, Sloane? This little act won't hold. We'll expose you for the manipulative wife you really are." Her threats spilled out in front of the family, a desperate attempt to redirect shame before it settled on her son. Ethan pulled out his phone and dialed furiously, pacing under the stares of 100 eyes. I knew who he was calling, his family's lawyer, the same man who had smoothed over his indiscretions for years. Ethan hissed into the receiver, words like freeze assets and file injunction reaching my ears even across the room. He wanted to lock me out, to trap me before I could take another step. But I had prepared for this moment. Calmly, I slipped a folder from my bag. Inside were the first pieces of my arsenal, copies of the post-nuptial agreement he had signed without reading, highlighted in yellow. The clause was simple. Financial misconduct constituted a breach, stripping him of claims to my property. I placed it on the desk before the hotel staff and his sputtering lawyer, my voice even. "This isn't about a card," I said. "It's about fraud." And he signed away his rights the moment he decided my money was his. For a heartbeat, silence fell. Then his lawyer leaned closer, flipping through the pages with a frown that deepened with every line. Ethan's protests faltered into stammering denial. I stood motionless, my hands steady. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw his younger sister, pale and trembling, her phone lowered to her lap, her lips pressed together as if she wanted to speak, but couldn't. For a brief moment, my anger softened. She was as much a victim of this family's culture of greed as I had been. I pressed my palm against the back of the chair beside me, grounding myself in that thought. I was still human, not just a blade. And then, the hotel's public address system crackled. A voice rang out, "Mrs. Sloane Carter, please report to the event coordination office. Mrs. Carter, 3rd floor." Every head turned toward me. Ethan's jaw dropped, suspicion flashing across his face. He hadn't realized there was another layer waiting. In the coordination office, a manager handed me a file. Inside was a printed transcript of the recorded call Ethan had made when booking the ballroom. His voice, smug and certain, filled the small space. "Yes, put everything under my name. I'll take full responsibility. She doesn't need to know." The staff had archived the call for liability, and now it was mine to wield. I returned to the ballroom where whispers had grown into open gossip. Ethan's fury only sharpened the spectacle. He tried to claim the recording was fake, But the manager stood beside me, confirming the hotel's process. Then, another twist. At the edge of the room, a quiet woman with a press badge adjusted her glasses. My mentor's doing. She wasn't there to sensationalize. She was a consumer journalist documenting transparency at luxury venues. She had witnessed everything, a neutral party who would ensure no one could spin the narrative against me. The banker's confirmation arrived by email minutes later. Every alert, every rejected charge, every previous borrowed transaction logged in detail. The evidence left no space for denial. The hotel formally transferred the entire bill, tens of thousands of dollars, into Ethan's name. His hand shook as he scrawled his signature on the receipt, the pen scratching like nails on glass. The room was silent now. His family, once boisterous, sat frozen. Some glared, others avoided my eyes altogether. The performance was over, and the star had destroyed himself. I didn't smile. Instead, I walked calmly out of the ballroom, the cool night air wrapping around me as I stepped onto the balcony. The wind tugged at my hair, and for the first time in months, I let my body relax. My eyes stung, but no tears fell. The warmth in my throat wasn't triumph, it was release. Tomorrow, the lights would be brighter, the stage bigger. Tonight was spectacle. Tomorrow would be judgment. Because tomorrow, it would no longer be the ballroom, it would be the courtroom. The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined, yet the weight of it pressed down on all of us. Sunlight filtered through narrow windows, striking the polished wood where the judge sat. Ethan's lawyer shuffled papers, already sweating. My attorney placed a neat stack of evidence on the table between us. My truth ledger, printed bank statements, the audio recording of his words, the hotel reservation contract, and the digital alerts from the bank. Each piece laid out like a chain, unbreakable, undeniable. The judge leaned forward as the sequence unfolded. Dates lined up with charges. Audio matched receipts. The hotel's call recording confirmed Ethan's explicit responsibility. The journalist's sworn testimony provided neutral verification. Layer upon layer, the facade he had built crumbled in plain view. Then came the legal pivot, what my attorney called the trigger clause. Ethan had signed the postnuptial agreement himself, brushing it off as another formality. Now, the clause roared to life. Financial misconduct meant forfeiture of rights. The judge read it aloud, his voice echoing, "All assets belonging to Mrs. Carter remain solely hers in the event of proven fraud." The gavel's tap punctuated the verdict. In a single moment, the apartment, my retirement fund, and my savings were secured. Ethan was locked out of everything he once claimed as his. I thought the humiliation was complete until Daniel, his younger brother, shifted in his seat. Pale and restless, he cleared his throat and produced his phone. "I think the court should see this," he said. On the screen, a string of messages appeared. Ethan boasting of plans to open a new credit line using my personal information, scheming to replicate his access before the hotel debacle. The courtroom murmured, shock rippling like a storm tide. Daniel's betrayal was born of envy, but it sealed Ethan's fate. Even his own blood had turned against him. For a fleeting second, I considered pressing further, using the scandal to obliterate his reputation entirely. But I stopped. Enough damage had been done. I told my attorney to pursue only what was legally mine. No extra demands, no public spectacle beyond what already existed. Justice, not vengeance. That was the line I refused to cross. I would not become him. When the hearing ended, I stepped out into the cool afternoon air. My mother waited by the courthouse steps. I hadn't realized how much I needed her embrace until I collapsed into it. We stood there for a long time, her arms holding me steady, her cheek pressed against mine. For the first time in years, I felt safe in the most ordinary way. Driving home, I realized the truth. When you stop performing for others, life begins performing for you. The papers were signed within weeks, the divorce was finalized, the assets divided. Ethan slunk into obscurity, burdened with debt and disgrace. I didn't follow his downfall. I didn't need to. My story had already moved on. In its place, something new began. I opened a small studio, a consulting firm dedicated to reputation and crisis management for women who had faced financial abuse. Clients found me quickly, through whispers, through referrals, through the quiet understanding that I had walked the fire and come out alive. Every story I heard broke me a little, but it also stitched me stronger. I became both shield and mirror, proof that survival was not just possible, but transformative. My friendships, once eroded by isolation, bloomed again. Mara came over with wine one evening, and we laughed until tears blurred our vision. I cooked meals I'd never dared to before, spicy dishes, messy breakfasts, without needing permission or apology. The freedom of small choices felt larger than any courtroom victory. Inside, I carried a new creed. Revenge is not violence. It is rewriting the rules, reclaiming the dignity they tried to erase. Justice is the quiet strength of saying, "No more," and living to prove it. One morning, as dawn spilled across my new office window, I watched the city stir to life. Papers lay scattered across my desk, a mug of tea cooling beside me. The steam curled upward, unhurried, pure. For the first time, my smile came easily, warm, not brittle. I was no longer armor. I was whole. I lifted the mug, sipped, and let the unsweetened taste settle. No sugar, no masks. Just me. And then my inbox pinged. A new email blinked onto the screen, subject line stark against the glow. He did this to me too. I sat back, the weight of new stories pressing forward, another woman's voice reaching for help. My journey had ended, but perhaps in a different way, it was just beginning.